Right. So, I've had a pretty successful time with doing research with undergrads, really since I came here. And I don't know about you, but for me doing research was really important. I really wanted to keep on doing some research when I came to Leeds. But there were some realities that I had to deal with, and I had to work out a way to make it happen. So, I think one of the challenges is always to work out how to thrive regardless of your circumstances. If circumstances are different to what you're used to, you got to adapt. And I think I have really quite successfully done so. It does help that the projects that I picked were picked with the idea of working with undergraduates. And of course that doesn't necessarily work for everybody. But I think most folks could squeeze in at least one undergraduate somewhere into their research. Is that a fair thing to say? Jeff, could you squeeze an undergraduate in? You do?
I do.
All right, Steve, reckon you could?
We're going to find out.
Yep, okay. All right. Well, I usually work with a lot, 3, 4, 5 at least, over the summer, typically. And I'm mostly going to talk about summer research, because for me that's the only time I can really be very productive. I do have a research class during the semester which helps a bit, but we don't get anywhere near as much done, and it really is a teaching opportunity more than anything else. And of course it depends on your department whether you have such a thing either. So I'm going to talk really about summer. Why do I work with undergraduates? Because, am I allowed to say slave labour? Those words? Okay, anyway, they help me do work I couldn't do by myself. My project needs leg work and arm work and body work. And in fact, I think one of the reasons why I've been successful is because it's easy for me to get undergraduates to work. At a big school, it may be quite hard to. I can put more hours in, more people doing more work than most research labs can. So that's really helped me a lot. I found that if I involve undergraduates, my funding opportunities go up a lot. Okay. Without undergraduates, it can be quite hard to be competitive. At the end of the day, my sister is at a very different institution, and what strikes me is that in many institutions, faculty treat the institution as an opportunity for them to develop their careers. And that's different to here, where our primary focus is to service students, to help them develop their careers, and it makes a huge difference in terms of their opportunities for presenting at meetings. I always try and get my students to present. Depending on the funding, they have to, and makes a huge impact on their ability to compete for professional grad schools. So that's why I do it, and I have too much fun doing it also. Obviously, splashing around in the river for half the summer is good fun at the best of times, and camping and hanging out and hiking, all those things. I really get to know my students really well, and I just have too much fun doing it. I wouldn't like to do it on my own. So, some practicalities. It can be quite hard to get students to sign up unless there are tangible rewards, preferably money. So, that's a big part of what I do, is try and find money for them. So, what can you do? Well, my main source of money has been the Ledford Scholars Program, the ACA. Now, this particular scholarship really is limited to undergrads who came from an Appalachian high school. And that's defined by the Appalachian Council. And it basically is from North Georgia all the way up to, I think, well, yeah, strictly speaking, geologically, the Appalachians go further, but I think Pennsylvania, maybe New York State, possibly, is about the limit, but it actually includes a lot of our students. You'd be surprised how many of them actually did go to high school in Appalachian County. And that's the website there. You can get up to 2 students working on the same project. That's nice. Best of all, they pay them an hourly rate and sign over a check for $1,000 per student for supplies and expenses. okay, which you get to spend. In other words, it comes to you, me, and we spend it. Whatever we think we need to. And you want to set up a contract through the business office, student employment office, to pay the students their hourly rates. My experience is, I've been on the committee quite a few times that reviews proposals, is that it's a pretty easy pot of money to access if you do a few things. It has to, they really are looking for a strong advisor. Okay? So you need to be really involved in your student scholars, in their project. It's not a hands-off, let them sink or swim kind of thing. And that's fine for me because my project, they couldn't do without me. The proposal instructions are quite detailed, and you need to follow them closely. That sounds obvious, but it's surprising how many proposals come to us, and it seems like we read the instructions. And they say things like, please set out the goals, both for the student and for the university and the community even. We'll cover those. Make sure there's a statement or two that covers the outcome goals. I found that the ACA tends to reward hypothesis-driven projects, which is easy in science. We typically have a question, and we have an experimental approach, and we have some clear predictions that our experiments will test. The result is, nearly every time, science proposals are funded. The social sciences and humanities can struggle to come across with a strong proposal where it's pretty clear that they've got a question in mind, and they're going to go about it, solving it in a certain way, in specific manners. Far too often, the proposals are quite nebulous, quite vague, and the committee is a mixture of faculty, science and humanities. And it's just, when you compare a science proposal versus a humanities proposal, it's pretty easy to get the science proposal and see how clear and focused it is, and find the humanities proposal quite vague. So if you can write in humanities or in social sciences a very clear directed, this is our goals, this is our questions, and how we're going to go about it, it should be very easy, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for humanities proposals that stand out. So as long as you do that, I think it's really easy. One of the challenges is that the student is supposed to write the proposal, which is clearly impossible. So it needs to look like it's written by the student, but clearly they need a lot of help in writing it. So, given that the deadline is typically January 11th or 10th, which is a disastrous application deadline for us, usually, you've really got to start early and help the students write a few drafts over Christmas break.
It's collaborative.
It is, yes, that's right. So that's a tricky one to negotiate. Oh wait, where's my title gone? I lost my title. The title says, oh no, it doesn't yet. I'm running ahead of myself. I've managed to, most folks can get a Lee University Faculty Research Award, and the committee is willing to allow some of that to go to student stipends if you can demonstrate that you really need students to help you with the project. You couldn't do it without student help. That's really important. And again, you need to get a contract with the business office and the student employment office to work out how to pay them. They don't like this, get a check and hand out dollar bills for tax reasons and the like. I've asked Dr. Conn for money to pay students a stipend over the summer. In fact, that's all I've ever asked him for. And he's always said yes. So that's a thought too. Some students will be quite happy to take the class for credit, so take a research class for credit if you have it in your department on the books, but no double dipping. In other words, don't pay them as well. Okay? Okay, moving along, what about paying you? It would be nice to not have to teach because you're broke, and get paid for this time that you spend doing research with students. So I've had some success once again with the ACA, with their faculty fellowships. You can ask for a summer fellowship, and they'll pay up to $6,000, and they don't require a budget. They don't even necessarily require any justification for what you're going to do with that money. And you can have it sent to Lee and have it sent through payroll. At least I haven't passed. I assume that's the case still. So I've managed to effectively get a summer salary through the ACA. Okay. If you're going to do this, you have to have a colleague from a Research One institute, and a research institute that is going to collaborate with you. That's essential. You can't go it alone. It is quite competitive, and even more so than with the Ledford Award, you have to write a proposal that's very hypothesis driven. They're looking for that. Okay. All right, and just watch out for submission dates. Late October seems to come already. Right. Working with undergraduates is fantastic, but occasionally doesn't go so well. And so one of the things I've really tried to do is be patient and emphasize the process of doing research is what we're trying to do here, rather than being totally fixated on the product, the end point. You've got to change that mindset and recognize that students need to learn the research process. It's going to take some time. And it may well go badly. Whether it's weather, keeping out of the field, or in the molecular lab, reagents that stop working, or freezers that break down. Who knows? All things can go wrong, and you're going to be encouraging, let them know that this is pretty normal. Hang in there. Try and up front let your students know what your expectations are in terms of time commitment, that's the most important one, and general performance. And bear in mind, you may find yourself having to fire a student. Well done. Okay? Wasn't fun, but had to be done. That's it.
Everything Michael said has been pretty true for me. I've pursued most of the funding opportunities that you pursued and been pretty successful in getting the money I need to do what I do. But most of my students, though, I've settled in on having most of them do it for credit. So summer archaeology field school that we run every summer, students take that for credit, for 3 hours of credit. Now, I do have a budget. The institution gives me a $2,000 a year budget for transportation to take them to and from the site and to cover some other expenses. And so we do that. But we also have some other opportunities throughout the year. We have another course, or actually it's 3 courses for 1, 2, or 3 hours of credit. It's a research practicum that they can do in any semester. And a lot of students work with me during the regular semesters in some of the projects I'll describe here for that credit, 1, 2, or 3 hours. So we have those opportunities. We also have an ethnographic writing and research class, which we do on study abroad trips, and those are usually research project-driven anthropology trips where we go and actually write an ethnography and present a paper at a conference when we get back. And we've been pretty successful in having students do that with us. So we get to do these joint papers, we get to do ongoing important, as I'll show you, as I'm just going to run through a quick list of the things we've involved students in the last several years. We have a lot of important projects we involve students in, and I do, like you, emphasize the process over the results, because a lot of the stuff we're doing here is not for the goal of publishing a peer-reviewed journal article. It's to support stuff for the U.S. Forest Service. It's a community service kind of stuff, consulting with local people about the archaeological resources on their land, that kind of stuff. But it's all research, because I approach this from a research paradigm. That is, we're working on an 1,100-acre farm right now called Green Shadow Lake. There's all kinds of Native American occupation on this site. I'm the only one who has archaeological access to it. It's full of stuff. I just don't want to just go out there and start digging stuff up. I have been developing a very sophisticated research protocol for how we're going to approach analyzing this 1,100 acres out there, because it literally is dotted everywhere with archaeological sites. And I think it's going to turn out to be a really important archaeological site too. It's really the only huge, actually there are 1,600 contiguous acres out there, 2 different farms owned by the same families. So basically this is the largest undeveloped contiguous piece of property in Bradley County. I mean, it's just huge. And so, and we have access to it for, it's 10 miles from here for student research. Well, what have we been doing with students and how do they get involved in this? Well, actually that's starting on the wrong slide. Let me end that and start on the right slide. As I kind of go through this somewhat chronologically. 2001, 3 years after I came to Lee, we took some students to Jordan, Kerak, Jordan, and we did some research there. We only took 2 students that time, and this was sort of when Global Perspective stuff was in its infancy and we're kind of figuring out what to do. And we took some students there to dig at a site called Mudaybiyah, and they participated in conferences and stuff when they got back, and we didn't have an anthropology major then, so that was sort of my beginning of involvement with students in research here at Lee. And then, in 2003, I went to Santiago, Chile, led the Summer Spanish Institute trip. When I was down there, I discovered there were 300,000 Palestinian Christians living in Santiago, Chile. And since my area of expertise is the Middle East, I said, wow. The next year, 2004, I took 10 students back and we did some ethnographic research on long-distance nationalism in this community. And we presented papers at, we presented 5 papers at the Southern Anthropological Society meetings, and they were pretty well received. In 2005, went back to Chile again. This time I studied Pentecostalism in Chile, and we presented a paper, a joint paper, at the Society for Pentecostal Studies conference the following year. We also did stuff for local folks around here. 2006, I took sabbatical and discovered that I thought all the archaeology had just in the back of my mind, because I'd been working in the Middle East for so long, I didn't know what was going on in America. I went over to the Forest Service and I said, hey, you know, what's the state of archaeology around here? And I went to Nashville, went to the Tennessee Division of Archaeology because we wanted to do some projects here locally. And they said, like, nothing's been done. I found out virtually since the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority days of archaeology here, nothing has been done in archaeology around here. And so we started doing stuff for local folks and hooked up with the Forest Service and started working with them in 2006. One of the things we did was a project for a local landowner out in Hopewell. They had a cemetery in the woods behind their house, and they wanted to cut off part of the hill to develop their property that this cemetery stood on, but they didn't know where all the graves were. So we actually went out and cleared this site and mapped all the graves and came up with a very detailed map for them, and so that they knew how to landscape their property without destroying the cemetery, which of course is against the law. So, and then we, in the couple years later, we did the same thing with the U.S. Forest Service. Our first big project for the U.S. Forest Service was to go out and clear and map Price Cemetery, which is a historically important cemetery out by where the halfway house is on the Ocoee. The halfway house was where the folks stopped from the copper mines on their way into Cleveland. It was the halfway house, halfway between, you know, Ducktown and Cleveland. And it was a huge community there, a thriving community in the early 1800s. And this cemetery is representative of that community. There are graves there that go back to the early 1800s. And so we cleared and mapped that for the U.S. Forest Service. In 2009, actually in 2008, we actually, that number's wrong. In 2008, we started working at Fort Armistead every summer. We run archaeology field schools. It's the only Cherokee removal fort that anything's left of. The only 2 universities working out there are us and University of North Carolina. And we work for the U.S. Forest Service out there every year, excavating and evaluating this very important site. And lo and behold, we also found last year, we're excavating and we're saying this stuff doesn't make any sense. We're finding stuff from the 1860s, and we find that there are buildings built over what would be the Fort Armistead buildings. And lo and behold, we find that we have the 69th Thomas Legion Confederate camp is out there. The only Confederate camp that anything is left of. We've got it, and one is right across the street from the other. Basically, we've got 2 incredibly important historical sites that we're excavating and developing out there. 2010, we started getting involved with Five Points Museum. And I send students down there for research practicums to work in the museum with collections and things like that. I also do a lot of cataloging for them. They send me stuff and we identify and catalog. 2010, I was the guest curator for the Bowen collection, which was brought in from the old Bob Jones University. They had a collection from a couple called the Bowens, who knew Sir Flinders Petrie and stuff, and they had all this really interesting stuff they brought back from the Middle East. And we actually helped design the display and wrote, and students helped me with this too. We actually wrote all of the signs and the signage and everything for the display. And we have an ongoing project in Colorado since 2010. We take students out to Colorado, work with the Bureau of Land Management out there, doing research. And finally, coming down the last couple pictures here, we have students working close here at Anderson Farm and Green Shadow Lake doing archaeology, both in my intro to archaeology class and during the summer. I run an extra field season working out there and documenting collections for the museum. And also we do private consulting, hood property. People call me up all the time and say, I think I got an archaeological site on my property. Can you come out and take a look? So we go out and we survey and map and do everything. Sometimes they have one, sometimes they don't. In this case of the hood property, they didn't. So sometimes research, the end result is disappointing. They kept finding all these clay balls all over the property. And we went out and took a look. Indeed, there were clay balls. They collected a whole bunch of them all over the property. We surveyed the property, did a very detailed map. We were unable to locate anything prehistorically, culturally significant on the property though. And I did a little research. I took some of those clay balls and I did a little bit of research and I finally figured out what they were. They're actually something called baking beans. You know what those are? They use them for making pie shells. They're clay balls. They're modern. Somebody had taken a big, they sell them in big gallon jars. Somebody apparently who had been a previous landowner in that house had taken a jar of these things and just thrown them out there, and that's what they were. Disappointing, but the process of actually finding that out is what we did. So that's what we do with students. You're not probably going to make great scientific discoveries with you, although we've been lucky. I mean, oldest prehistoric site in North America, Cherokee removal fort and all this stuff. We're involved in some pretty significant stuff. Undergraduate students do pretty good about providing the manpower to get things done. 1 cubic meter of dirt is 1 cubic meter of dirt. And it takes a lot of hours to move 1 cubic meter of dirt in a systematic way, you know, scraping it with a trowel. Undergraduate students are good at that, but we don't just involve them in just the manual labor stuff. I steep them in research design. Why are we doing what we're doing? It's all part of the stuff that we involve them in. Okay, now that we got this stuff, what do we do? How do we publish this? How do we organize this stuff and analyze it? And even though we may not get to publish some of this stuff, or they may not be involved in publication of some of it, we do talk about that. We spend a lot of time making sure they understand the research process. Hey, this is work because some of my students, based on the experiences they've had with me, are now working full-time for museums and stuff, and actually doing significant anthropological and archaeological work now. So this experience makes a difference in helping them get jobs after they get out of school, and you get into good grad schools too.
Mine was based in program assessment. I mean, that's where the project that came from that I did with my students. And it all started with a question that my chair gave me. She said, Jeff, we have this course called English 105, and it's been married to this 2-hour per week workshop. You know, the idea being that the students taking this course, anecdotally, I mean, on paper it looks great. It looked like this would be working really well. Anecdotally, we thought, you know, it had been around, it had been on the books for 12 or 13 years, and based on what we heard, it sounded like it wasn't working. So she said, could you look into this? So I said, sure. And she said, and if you want to, like, you know, this is my second or third year here, and she said, if you want to get some students to help you with it, go for it. So I forget whose question was. So I had a student in mind who had, for one of her projects for me, had done a similar, because I knew what I was going to need to do. I was going to need to probably do some focus groups. I was probably going to need to do some surveys, maybe some observations of these labs, but just basically talking to, in a systematic way, talking to or hearing from the different stakeholders, the students, the instructors, the peer instructors who are working with this. And so I thought, well, you know, I'll get some students. So I identified a couple of students, and getting back to your question, Steve, I mean, what I realized, and even though, like, I knew the students and I knew who I wanted to work with, and I knew that they were good students and good writers, and that they'd show up on time and that they'd do what I needed them to do, but they didn't know any of the disciplinary questions that we were asking. They didn't know a thing about, like, methods. How do we go about this? How do we, like, okay, we need to know if this program works. So what I found for the first, really setting it up for the first few months was introducing them to the kinds of questions that we needed to ask. Like, what are the questions? What are we getting at? Before we even come up with a hypothesis, we needed to have a question. And so, and I realized that what I was doing at that point was sharing with them, readings I had done in grad school, sharing with them just ideas I knew from program assessment to help them develop, to help them understand like what we were after. And then it was also a matter of knowing what counted as legitimate evidence to answer these questions, and which is again another very disciplinary kind of knowledge that they didn't have, because at no point in our curriculum did they take a research methods class, which I wish they did, but it wouldn't fit and there's no room for it, unfortunately. But anyway, so the first few months was really just like walking them through, was getting them used to what we were asking, what we were looking for, and how we were going to, the methods, how we were going to go about doing that. So then they, we kind of designed, we wrote up some focus group questions, we started planning that, we started writing up a survey, which I realized at some point I was doing the bulk of the work because they didn't have the tools to do that kind of, they didn't have, they had some idea of questions, but they hadn't done it before, so the survey questions that they would have written wouldn't have gotten us any good data. So I realized that I really had to take the lead on that, and if they had a good idea, I would then have to parse it out into the 4 or 5 different questions it needed to be, or say, okay, good, but I think we need to word it this way for this reason. And at the outset of doing that, I felt bad, because I felt like I kept taking over, and I wasn't valuing what they were doing and what they were contributing, and because I wanted them to go home at the end of the day and feel like I am helping Dr. Ringer with this project, and that makes me feel good about myself. I wanted them to call their grandmothers and say, listen to what I'm doing, isn't this so exciting? And I felt like I was just kind of doing it for them, but I had to. And if I thought about it as we are co-researchers working on this, I felt bad. If I thought about it as they're kind of the apprentices to this way of thinking and this way of asking questions and this way of gathering research, then I felt better because I was modeling for them how they had to go about this. And so then the focus group started, and once we started gathering data, and for me the data was probably the strategies for analyzing it and interpreting it are much more common sense than what you might have and what you guys might have in your fields, because it was what are these students saying about how well this is or is not working, and really we did kind of we kind of coded the data via a sort of an emergent theme, we looked for emerging themes basically, and so all of this, based on that, all these questions, once that started to happen, it just really kind of avalanched, and it was pretty easy then to start thinking of where to go next and thinking about how to use this data. And so somewhere in that process, that first part of it was thinking like, is this program working the way we want it to work? And it didn't take long for us to realize that no, it was not working the way we wanted it to work. So in the process of all this, I was researching different models that we could use for this course. I kind of vetted a few of them with my colleagues in the department, and shortly, and this was fall of 2010, I think, that we started researching the existing program. Spring of 2011, we in one of my classes tested a new model, and this is where Laura's sister Kristen helped me with this research, and another senior English major, Chase Ramsey. And basically what they did at that point was we moved from this intensive writing instruction model to this writing studio model, which Carolyn mentioned in our session yesterday. And I identified Kristen and Chase as they had both been peer instructors in English 105, and I asked them, would you be willing to serve as my guinea pigs for this new program, this new model for writing studios. So they started working as, and again, it was mentoring, it was how are we going to do this? How is this different from what you've done before? And so they started leading writing studios. And then, where did we go from there? Well, at that point, we kind of started testing this model, and it seemed like it was promising, and so we developed a full test pilot model, or a test pilot, I guess, an extended pilot is what we called it for the last academic year, where we tried went full bore, all classes writing studio model. Chase and Kristen served as assistant directors of the program, mentoring the new writing studio facilitators, and it culminated in, well, actually it's still culminating, but we, in St. Louis, we presented I was on the panel with Chase and Kristen, another student who helped me with the initial part of the research, Bethany. The four of us were on a panel at the annual convention of the Conference on College Composition and Communication, 4Cs as we call it, in St. Louis in March. And they kind of all shared a different component of what they did in this new model. And one of my favorite things about that was I had to convince them prior to the conference, because this is not an undergraduate conference, this is not a grad student conference, this is a professional conference, this is PhDs or grad students too. I had to convince them that they had the authority to speak about this, because they kept telling me, Jeff, I just graduated, like I can't do, there's going to be PhDs there. How can I talk to them about anything meaningful to somebody who has done his dissertation on this thing? I said, trust me, you'll be fine. And we presented, and this is kind of, I would think in a sense, a sort of, I mean, Michael's used the term process a number of times, and this for me, that moment for me represented kind of like an upper level in that process, where they had been walked through the kinds of questions we should ask, walked through how to lead these studios, and as we were developing this model, we were continuing to do focus groups and surveys in the new model, so that we kind of had book matched data. But they, at the later in the day after we presented, I mean, all three of them, they were just astounded that they had been treated as professionals. That they had been, nobody looked at them and said, you're just an undergrad, They were respected as authorities on this topic because they had done this work. And that's what I've been trying to tell them, but they didn't get it until they actually did it. As a result of that, two of them are we were asked to contribute to a forthcoming edited collection on writing studio pedagogy. Two of them that I know of at least are co-writing a chapter for this collection, and that's set to, I think, come out sometime in 2014. I forget the exact dates. But yeah, I mean, I kind of see the whole process, and I kind of see it still as mentoring. Like, even though 2/3 of these students that I worked with are graduated, and moving on to other things, I'm still helping them with the process of writing this, and because even though they're really good writers and they're really good thinkers, they still need to know like how to set up this chapter in a way that their audience would expect it to be set up, and they need to know again what counts as evidence and how to manipulate that evidence. And so I mean, yeah, I kind of really see the whole process as mentoring. And I think that, again, the co-researcher model, when I was thinking of that, which I know in my field is a buzz term, and I understand why, because it's like we're equals, but we're not. And I had to realize that. I knew a lot more than they knew, and it was my job, especially at the beginning, to sort of, to the extent that I could, bring them up to speed, so that they knew at least what counted as legitimate questions, legitimate sources of data, and legitimate ways of interpreting that data and writing about that data for the audience they were writing for. So yeah, that's kind of what I did.
Were they getting paid, or were they in a class, or was
No,
it just
they
volunteer?
two of them I ended up doing directed studies with, and I think the rest of them were just, they saw it as something that would definitely, they just wanted to do it. I mean, I didn't pay them. A few of them got credit, but they did it because they wanted to do it. And really, they helped me build a program, and I think for them that was hugely motivational.